Hey, welcome to the Inner Circle podcast, where growth minded leaders come together to build better businesses and better lives. I'm your host, Hector Alvarado. Here, we don't do theory, we share real lessons, real systems, and real strategies you can use right away. This is a community for people committed to growth, impact, and supporting each other on the journey. You're in the right room, my friends. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to another one of our OBS series calls here at the Inner Circle. And we are, pretty excited as we continue week 2 of the Performance Leader. And, last week we covered a lot of really good information that gave you some framework on how to establish some of those accountability stuff. But today we dive deeper. We go into the coaching conversation. This really starts to focus on develop people, not just manage output. So, as we think through this series, this is to really engage your leadership performance and to start to make you a better leader in your organization. So think of the last time you gave someone on your team feedback. Okay. Did you tell them what to do, or did you help them figure it out for themselves? Just think about that for a second. Okay. Because most leaders, if they're honest, and I know because I lived it, will feel like it's faster, so they just take more control, and what they do is they tell. That's generally how it goes, right? And that's okay. That's what we've been taught for a long time. Is if we just tell them, then it's faster. We still have a little bit more control, and it works. So why break it, right? That's what most of us have thought throughout our career. But here's the cost that nobody accounts for. Every time you tell instead of develop, you actually make that person a little more dependent on you being in that room. So do that for 2 years and you haven't built a team. You've actually built a group of people who can't move without your input. And that's what happens day to day for most businesses. That's the difference between managing and coaching. And it is what we're building today. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background story where I worked with a client with a shop foreman a while back who had so much pride in himself on being available. And I've lived it. I was always like that, available 24/7, always trying to do everything for everyone, right? Now, anyone on the floor could bring him any problem, anytime, and he'd solve it on the spot. He was so proud of how fast his team could get an answer. Except the shop couldn't run without him. He couldn't take a simple vacation. He couldn't even take a lunch most days because the questions never stopped. And when I asked his crew why, like what they do if a problem came up and he wasn't around, the honest answer from more than half of them was, we'll just wait till he's back. That was the general consensus. If he's not around, we'll wait till he's here. He thought he built a pretty responsive team, but what he'd actually built was a team that had never really been thinking for themselves because he'd always been faster. He was always available. So what we did is throughout 6 months of an engagement, we rebuilt how he handled these moments. Asking before answering was the critical first thing we established. That same crew was solving more problems on their own than they used to after we implemented this. Nothing in their skills actually changed overnight, but what had changed was the fact that he stopped being the fastest path to answer and started being the person who built the ability to find answers on their own. And that's the framework that we go into this week as we talk about the performance leader. Because last week we built the expectations, the outcome, the standard, the behavior, and a review rhythm, right? For your top 3 roles. You should have done that. We gave you that as homework. If you haven't finished that assignment, that's okay. We need you to go back to work on that because it's critical as we built out the series. Everything today is built on that day 1. So, you're going to need to be able to go back to finish that piece. But today, we're solving the performance failure, which is the absent coaching in organizations. This is what happens when a leader manages output, checking whether the number got hit, but never actually develops the person producing it. You inspect the result, but you never build the capability. And the moment you're not there to inspect it, that result breaks and it shows up too. So coaching is how you fix that, not by working harder, but by managing it, by working directly on that. So let's understand the framework of coaching versus managing. What's the difference? So let's be precise about that because these two get confused constantly. Most of us think they're the same, but they're very, very different. Managing is checking whether the outcome happened. Let me give you an example. Did the report get done? Did the truck leave on time? Did the number hit the goal? That's necessary. You have to build that so that there is a level of accountability. But managing alone only tells you whether something happened or not. It does nothing to build the person's ability to make it happen again and again and again without you. The key is without you. Coaching is different. Coaching builds the thinking, the judgment, and the capability behind the outcome. So the person can produce that result on their own in situations you never specifically trained them for. Again, because you can't be in every room. You can't be in every plant. You can't be in every branch. You can't be in every storefront. You can't be in every customer's home. You can't be. So these people that work for you have to be able to think on their own. And here's the test that I want you to use going forward after this conversation. Did the other person get smarter or did they just get told what to do? If they only got told, then you managed. That's on you. That's on us as leaders to understand that. If they walked away thinking differently about their own work, then you coached. Then you helped them learn something. Coaching gets skipped for various reasons, but particularly reason why is because telling is faster. So naturally, we skip this step. So if someone brings you a problem and you already know the answer and it takes you 10 seconds to give it to them, that's what you naturally do. I know because I remember back in the day when I was, a junior manager learning my way through things, that's what I thought it meant to be a leader. I thought that's how you manage, right? However, coaching that same moment might take you 10 minutes, might take you half an hour, might even take you an hour sometimes if the problem is large enough. And so when you're busy, and we're all busy because we're leaders, then every time we get at this, telling becomes your way out. Just pure math. Every single time you're in that moment, and you just tell people because you have the answer. But that's the math trap. The 10 seconds today, repeated time and time again over 2 years, produces a team that brings you every decision because you've trained them to do that, right? And even though you think you're faster than figuring them out for themselves, that's what occurs is you become the source of truth. You become so dependent, like they become dependent on you. Meanwhile, if you're spending 10 minutes today, repeatedly, consistently, what it does, it produces a team member who stops bringing you all this category of problems because they've built the judgment to solve it. And one of those options doesn't actually scale. So if you think about it logically, one doesn't scale. The other one is the entire point of leadership. So let's give you the framework on how to implement this. Now, I know last week we did the 4 and 4 and 4 and 4, so I'm going to break it differently this week for you. I'm going to give you 5 parts instead of 4, okay, in order for you to implement this and use this as your framework every time you run into a coaching conversation. This is how you use it live. Part 1, open with purpose. Before anything else, tell them why you're having this conversation. In plain language. Don't overcomplicate it. Okay, you have to just make sure you're in plain language. They should not have to guess at why they're sitting in front with you. Vagueness at an open conversation makes people defensive. And because their brain fills that information with defensiveness, it actually becomes silent in the room. And that's the worst case that could happen, because then you lose them. So name the purpose directly. Tell them that this is developmental and not disciplinary. This is critical, because the moment you tell them that it's developmental, it actually opens them up to want to listen, because they know it's a learning opportunity. If they think it's disciplinary, well, they think they're in trouble, and they're going to have their guards up. So make sure that that number one part is so critical. Set the stage, open that widely. Okay. Part two is ask before you tell. Now, this is the part almost every leader will skip, and it is the one that matters the most. Before you give your view, and I know this is hard because you already have a preconception of what is going on, do not say it. Ask for theirs. How do you think that went? Is a critical question. Where do you think the gap is? People commit far more to insight they discover themselves than to feedback given to them. It's psyche. It's super psyche, but it works. And half the time, they'll actually identify the exact same gap you were able to name in your head, which changes the entire tone of the conversation, because they've come forward with the gap that you were looking to coach on. Now, again, that's not all the time, but most of the time you will find that's the case, especially if the individual's being honest and truthful. Part three is reflect on that gap. Now, bring in the standard from that expectations blueprint that we talked about last week. Okay. This is no longer your opinion. This is the standard that you both agreed to. Now, that makes this conversation a lot stronger, because you're able to compare what actually happened against the specific measurable bar. And you're able to name that gap quite easily, because the standard already exists. Remember, we spoke about that last week. And so if you have this in place, this step is far less confrontational than it would be if you were introducing the bar for the first time in this conversation. So it is critical that you use the steps from last week so that a standard is already set. You're not talking about what it takes to win. You're simply saying you didn't win because this is what we said you'd be at. This is what you do. You would send the report every day at 3 p.m., but you sent it at 4, or you sent it at 5, or you didn't send it at all. So you're able to always have a starting point. Part 4 is co-build the growth plan together. Don't hand them a plan. Build it with them. Ask what they think would close that gap and what you see that they might be missing. That plan should map out the behavior component of the blueprint. Be specific, repeatable actions. Again, not vague intentions like try harder or be more careful. Don't use language like that. Be specific to what you're looking to improve on. And the fifth part is lock up the follow-up. I really, really dislike coaching conversations that don't close the loop, that don't establish when you're going to follow up again. Because that specific date is the thing that you'll both look at to be accountable. And please don't say things like, now let's check in soon. Set an actual day. Tie it to a rhythm, whether that's once per week, twice per week, however, but a coaching conversation without a locked follow-up is just a nice chat. It's really all that is. You just had a nice little conversation. The follow-up is so important. That is what makes this count. Okay? So again, just the 5 points. Here we go. Open with purpose. Ask before you tell. Reflect the gap. Co-build the plan. And lock up the follow-up. It's 5 parts every single time. Now, before you walk in and you go have your first conversation, because I know you're going to be geared up and ready to go to work, take a few minutes of preparation. This makes every part of this framework work so much better. So before you run, make sure you have some examples. And so here's some that we are ready for you, okay? Pull your blueprint, what we talked about last week. We want to set the standard in front of you. in the exact words that you both agreed, not from memory. Do not do that. If you don't have a blueprint, go start one. This is why we said last week to go do it. Okay. Have one or two specific examples ready, not general impression. You've been inconsistently late. That gives somebody nothing to work with. Say the specifics. Last Friday, you left. You didn't come in on time. That's 2 weeks running that you've been late every single Friday. That gives some concrete answers and data to respond to. Pick a time and a place where the conversation won't get rushed or interrupted. Okay. Do not have this conversation on the hallway. If it's a coaching conversation, make sure it's in somebody's office. And preferably, I'll tell you that where to have this is generally in the other individual's office or workspace. Because if you have it in your office, it actually creates a sense of power having it in your office, and it could feel disciplinary. So if you're talking to another manager in your organization, go have this conversation in their office. It sets the tone. It makes it a little bit more welcoming and less disciplinary from an overall standard. Okay? Now, go in again with a genuine question, not a scripted verdict. If you've already decided exactly what happened and exactly what needs to happen before you actually have this conversation, you just wasted your time. Don't do that to yourself. Okay? So let's run it through a live example to give you an idea of how this works. Okay? So picture a team member, call it a project coordinator, whose standard from the blueprint was client updates every Friday by a certain time. Call it 3 p.m., no exception. 2 Fridays in a row, that update went out on Monday instead of Friday at 3 p.m. So we're going to open the conversation with purpose. So I want to talk through that Friday client updates. This is not a write-up. This is a coaching conversation. I want to understand what's going on and figure it out together. Okay, remember, ask before you tell. Walk me through the last 2 Fridays. What happened? What happened, Sally? How come you didn't get them out? Let her answer before you say anything else. She might tell you she's underwater on a whole different scenario on Friday afternoon, which is information that you didn't have. And that changes what the actual fix needs to be. So reflect on the gap. The standard we agreed upon was on Friday, 3 p.m., no exceptions. Remember, Sally? And it's landed Monday afternoons for 2 weeks running. I hear that Friday afternoons are getting crowded and you've got a lot of bandwidth issues on Fridays. So let's figure out why. What needs to change? Now we get into the co-build component and we build out a plan together. What if the update got drafted Thursdays afternoons instead of Fridays? So Friday is just the final review and send. Would that solve it? Is there something else out of the way that we need to get out of the way? No. Whatever conversation happens throughout that period, and then you lock up the follow-up. Let's try for that the next 2 Fridays. I'll check in with you at 3:15 just to have a quick look. No big conversation. We just want to see how it went, and we'll see where it goes. Notice what didn't happen in that conversation. There was no lecture. There was no assumption about why it happened before asking. And by the end, she built the fix, which means that she owns it instead of just complying with something that you handed to her. Right? Now, this is something that most of us struggle with. So having this framework in place will give you the way to have these conversations. And remembering that people are humans and it's not always going to go smoothly like that, but you have your talking points, okay? Because coaching isn't only for closing gaps. Some of your best conversations will be with someone who's already meeting the standard. So we want to also look at performance improvement opportunities and where we can actually look at this for getting better. You have high performers on your team and you're developing them potentially into something bigger. So let's go talk to those people too and use it as a scalable, opportunity, a growing development opportunity. So let's run something like this as an example, but now it's about raising the bar, raising the standard, okay? Take that same warehouse lead that we talked about last week, hitting 98% on time shipping. zero safety incidents already. This person's hitting on all the numbers, but you're thinking that this person may be ready to be an operations manager. So you schedule the call with purpose. Again, you open and you say, hey, Bob, your numbers have been strong for 2 straight quarters. You're doing great. I want to talk about what's next for you, not what's wrong. So let's have a quick chat. Again, ask before you tell. Where do you feel you're ready to take on more? And where do you still feel unsure? This question will open it up. This is where Bob will be led into opening up how or where he believes he could add more value and where his opportunity for growth would be. Now, this is where you reflect on the gap that is shared by Bob. I agree with you. What you said about scheduling, right? Or whatever that is the area that is brought up. That is your stronger strength area, but let's talk about where we can go. How's your decision making under pressure? That's an area maybe that we could talk about. And we both now are in alignment on where that opportunity for growth could be. So you again go back and you build a growth plan together. If somebody says, hey, I struggle with making decisions right now, I don't know where that is. Well, what if we ran you on point on the next 3 escalated problems? Meaning, I'm going to put you in the line of fire. We have a problem with this. You struggle with decision making. I'm going to put you in that place. You might struggle. You might have a couple boo-boos, but that's okay. I'm going to be in the background helping you afterwards so that we can review each incident together, and we'll be able to see what worked and what didn't work and debrief with each other to help you grow. Okay. Now you're co-building the plan as you grow, as you engage. And then you lock it up. Let's revisit the activities in 4 weeks. After you've ran a few of these decisions on your own, I want to hear how it went from your side before we talk about next steps. The same 5 parts, but completely different context. It was more growth instead of correction. And that's what makes this framework be able to be applied consistently, because you're not just using it as a tool to discipline. You can also use this as a coaching and development tool as well. Okay. So here's the one thing that I'd love for you to take from today. If you take anything else, take this. Before your next piece of feedback leaves your mouth, ask yourself, have I asked them yet? Or am I about to just tell them? If you haven't asked, stop and ask first, even if you're almost certain you already know the answer. Most of you are smart leaders. You will already know the answer, I'm sure. But go ahead and ask. It helps engage the individual. It feels slower in the moment, and it is slower for sure. But it's a simple, highest leverage habit change in this entire series, because it's the difference between a team that thinks and a team that waits to be told. Okay. And that is so important, because one team that is told will never be scalable. They just won't. So a warning, as you start running these conversations, coaching can quickly turn back into telling if you're not careful. So watch out for the pattern. You ask the question, they stay quiet, and you jump in and give them the answer. Don't fall into that trap. Okay? This will happen, and it will happen more times than you think. Leverage the silence. The silence is uncomfortable, but that single habit will undo everything else in this framework if you start to give the answer. The silence after you ask is the real work. That person is thinking. They're not sitting there blank. They may be thinking for themselves at that moment. And if you give them the answer, you just burned them. You just took it away from them. So stay quiet, bite your tongue, and let the individual think. That will enable consistency. That will let you grow as a leader as well. So staying quiet is super important as you develop others around you. Now, I want to clarify some common mistakes before next week's session that can easily get confused with this. Okay. The coaching conversation is not a hard conversation, meaning that this coaching conversations assumes good faith and fixable gaps. The person you're talking to wants to hit the standard and needs development. It's collaborative in tone. It happened as often, or will be required to happen as often as it is needed. By a hard conversation is what we build next week. That is when coaching hasn't closed the gap. Okay, that's when the issue continues to show up every time more than we'd like. That will be more direct. That carries a lot more weight, and it is something that you run as needed, but we call that a PIP. Okay, that is a performance improvement plan. And that is usually like when you put that in place, that means someone is on their way out if they cannot deliver. That is multiple coaching sessions and opportunities given, but the individual just can't get. So keep those separate in your head. Using coaching language for a hard conversation makes it too soft to create change. And using hard conversation weight on a normal coaching moment makes people defensive over something that didn't need it. So know the difference between coaching and a hard conversation, because the hard one will be the PIP. And we're going to take you through that. So there's 4 common mistakes to watch out for. So I want you to take these down before we close. Okay? First one is skipping straight to the standard without asking first. If you open with the gap before you ask how they see it, you've turned a coaching conversation into a correction, and you've lost the ownership that makes that plan stick. Number 2 is being vague. Again, example that would be like communicate better is not a plan that anyone can really hit on with a standard, okay? The plan needs some specific data points, an actual number, a data point that you can reference. So tie it back to that blueprint that you created. Number 3 is no locked in follow-up. Without a specific date of a follow-up, again, this becomes an optional to do. And we know what happens with optional to do is they don't get done. So don't let them become that way. Always leave with a date on the calendar so that this is not left to chance. And the 4th part is coaching everyone the same way. Your highest performer and your most stretched performer need very different amounts of ask versus tell. The framework will hold for both, but a stronger performer will often just need the space. Okay, they just need you to back out a little bit and give them the ability to make decisions on their own so that they can think out loud. Okay, that's very important that we determine the difference on those. So here's why this framework works. I can tell you that the shift that happens once you run it consistently is a team that in the past would wait and would just bring problems for you and just waits for the answers because that's the pattern that they've been trained on. And a team that's coached starts solving not everything at first, but the range widens week by week, situational through situation. And they start building judgment to handle these decisions on their own because you spent time developing the thinking instead of just supplying the answer. Okay. So the whole point of this week is develop people, not manage output. So your team gets stronger even in the moments that you're not in the room, because there's a compounding effect that happens in every coaching conversation. So to recap, there are 5 parts, right? One more time, because we'll use these later. If you don't have the worksheets, I want to make sure that you get them. Open with purpose. Say why you're having the conversation. Plain English. Don't go too much into it. Ask before you tell. Let them give you their view before you give them yours. Reflect on the gap. Compare what happened against the standard that you have already agreed to. Co-build the resolution or the growth plan. So build actions together, tied to behavior. Do not you let yourself build it first. Let the individual be part of the solution. And then lock up the follow-up. Have a specific date tied to a time when you're going to meet. again, to review it. Because here's what I want to leave you with today. Go back to your building, go back to your team, and look for your highest potential team member, someone who's already meeting the standard, but who you want to develop further. Start here, because these will actually be an easier conversation to get comfortable walking through the 5 parts. But actually schedule that conversation next week. Okay? Go after one of those. Get that done with a high performer first. Test, get comfortable, run through the process. And then by the end of the week, I want you to have a conversation with someone that needs to improve. Okay? I want you to focus on someone that you're going to coach up. That's going to be the ask for this week, is go early in, find a high performer, establish the conversation with them, get comfortable, learn, try, and then go after the hard one. Do not do them the other way around, because you'll fumble through the hard one and then you'll lose confidence in yourself on this one. So that's the ask, that's the challenge for this week. So go run the conversation and let me know how it went. I'm curious. I'll be curious to know next week on how it worked for you. So that's the coaching framework, for this week. And so, Willie, I'll open it up with you first and maybe get some input from you and when you've seen this applied, and maybe even you yourself have applied something like this.
Awesome. Hector, I think this was a reminder I needed today. uh, and I think the one line that sticks out the most, that I think probably has helped me the most, is that ask before you tell. And that is something that not just works in business and your team. It works with parenting. It works with possibly your marriage,
Oh, yeah.
and it works with sales. Sales is a big one. You keep asking the question instead of just telling them what you think they need, right? And
Absolutely.
so, to me, that's the biggest takeaway today: is ask before you tell.
No kidding. That's great. That's awesome, Willie. That's a wrap for today's episode of The Inner Circle. If something in today's conversation resonated, inspired you, or gave you a breakthrough, please share it with someone you care about. The right idea at the right time can change someone's business and their life. So make sure you follow the show, leave a review, and stay connected with us, because this community is built on relationships, real support, and real growth together. Remember that clarity means nothing without action. So choose one insight from today, put it into motion this week, and notice the shift. Thank you for being part of this journey, for showing up for your growth, and for being part of the Inner Circle community. See you in the next episode, and let's keep growing together.